I knew something was wrong the moment my own son looked at me like I was a stranger. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind where the sunlight settles gently across the living room carpet, and the house smells faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner. My son Daniel was standing by the kitchen counter, arms folded across his chest, while his wife Melissa sat beside him with that soft, sympathetic expression she had perfected over the years. The kind of expression people use when they're talking about someone fragile, someone unstable. "Mom," Daniel said carefully, like he was choosing every word before it left his mouth, "Melissa told me what happened this morning." I remember gripping the back of a chair to steady myself. "What happened?" I asked. Melissa lowered her eyes. She even sighed a little, like the conversation pained her. "You forgot again," she said gently. "You accused me of hiding your medication." The room felt suddenly smaller. "I never said that," I replied. Daniel's face tightened. Not angry. Not exactly. Concerned. And that was worse. Melissa reached out and rested a hand on his arm, her fingers moving slowly, reassuringly. "It's okay," she said softly. "Your mom doesn't mean it. She just gets confused sometimes." Confused. The word floated in the air like smoke. I opened my mouth to protest, but Daniel had already looked away from me. He rubbed his forehead like a man who had too many worries and not enough sleep. "Mom," he said quietly, "maybe we should talk about seeing a doctor again." That was the moment something inside me shifted, because I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a story. And somehow, Melissa had convinced my own son that I was the problem. 3 years earlier, my life had been simple in the way that comes with age. I lived in a 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. The same house where Daniel had grown up. The same house where my late husband, Robert, had planted the maple tree that now stretched tall enough to shade half the backyard. The mornings were peaceful. I woke early, usually around 6. I'd brew coffee in the old stainless steel pot Robert had insisted on keeping even after the handle cracked. Then I'd sit at the kitchen table with the newspaper and listen to the neighborhood wake up. The distant hum of a lawn mower. The soft barking of Mrs. Harper's golden retriever next door. The familiar creak of the floorboards when I walked down the hallway. There was comfort in routine. And I was happy. Daniel visited often in those days. He had always been a good son, kind, thoughtful, a little quiet like his father. When he first introduced me to Melissa, he looked nervous in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager asking for the car keys. "Mom," he said one evening at the door, "this is Melissa." She was beautiful in a polished, effortless way. Dark hair, bright smile, the kind of confident posture that suggested she always knew exactly what to say. She brought a bottle of wine and complimented my garden within the first 10 minutes. "I can tell you put love into this house," she said warmly, touching the edge of the dining table like it was something delicate. At the time, I believed her. And for a while, things truly were good. After they married, Melissa and Daniel moved into the house with me. It had been Daniel's idea. "You shouldn't live alone," he told me. "Besides, the place is too big for just one person." I didn't mind the company. The house felt lively again with 2 more voices echoing down the hallways. Melissa liked to cook elaborate dinners on weekends, filling the kitchen with the smell of garlic and roasted vegetables. Daniel handled the yard work, humming quietly while he trimmed the hedges Robert had planted years earlier. At night, we sometimes watched television together in the living room. Normal family life. At least, that's what I thought it was. The first strange thing happened about 6 months after they moved in. I woke up one morning and couldn't find my car keys. I searched everywhere, my purse, the kitchen counter, the little wooden bowl by the front door where I always kept them. Nothing. Melissa found them later that afternoon. "They were in the freezer," she said, holding them up with a puzzled smile. "The freezer?" I laughed nervously. "Why on earth would I put them there?" Melissa shrugged lightly. "Maybe you were distracted." Daniel chuckled from the couch. "Mom's always been a little forgetful." We all laughed. But something about it lingered in the back of my mind. I knew my habits. After 62 years of living with myself, you get pretty familiar with the rhythms of your own behavior. And putting car keys in the freezer was not one of them. Still, I let it go. People forget things. Weeks passed and life continued. Until the second incident. I remember it clearly because it happened during breakfast. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast that morning. Melissa had been experimenting with a new toaster she bought online, and the thing had a habit of turning bread into charcoal. I was pouring orange juice when she suddenly frowned at me. "Linda," she said gently, "did you move my purse last night?" I shook my head. "No, well," she said slowly, "I found it in the garage this morning." Dash the garage. She nodded. Daniel looked up from his phone. "Mom, did you maybe grab it by mistake?" Dash, "I wouldn't take someone else's purse," I said, confused. Melissa smiled that same patient smile. "It's okay," she said softly. That word again. Okay. As if nothing was wrong. But that was the day I started noticing something else. Every time something strange happened, Melissa was the one who discovered it. And every time she told the story, it sounded slightly different than what I remembered. At first, I convinced myself it was coincidence. But deep down, a quiet unease had begun to settle in my chest, like the faint ticking of a clock in a silent room. And I had no idea yet that Melissa had already started telling everyone in our family a very specific story about me. A story where I was slowly losing my mind. And she was the one trying to take care of me. The first time I realized Melissa might be saying things about me behind my back was during a phone call with my sister, Carol. Carol and I spoke every Wednesday evening. It had been our habit for years. Long before Daniel grew up, long before Robert passed away. She lived 2 states away in Kentucky, and those weekly calls were our way of keeping the distance from feeling too wide. That evening, I was standing in the kitchen with the cordless phone pressed between my ear and shoulder while I washed a few dinner plates. Carol's voice sounded slightly hesitant. "Linda, can I ask you something?" "Dash, of course," I said, drying my hands with a dish towel. "Well," she paused. "Melissa mentioned you've been having some memory issues lately." I stopped moving. "Memory issues?" "Yes," Carol said gently. "She said you sometimes forget where you put things and get upset when people try to help." For a moment, I stared at the window above the sink. Outside, the maple tree Robert planted swayed quietly in the evening breeze. "I forget small things sometimes," I admitted. "But who doesn't?" Carol hesitated again. "She also said you accused her of stealing your jewelry." My stomach dropped. "I never accused her of that." "Dash, that's just what she told me," Carol said quickly. "I'm sure it was a misunderstanding." I forced a small laugh, though it felt hollow. "Yes," I said slowly. "A misunderstanding." After we hung up, I stood there for a long time with the silent phone still in my hand. Melissa had never mentioned that conversation to me. Not once. That night at dinner, I watched her more carefully than usual. She moved around the kitchen with her usual grace, setting plates on the table, brushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear. Her voice sounded calm as she asked Daniel about his workday. To anyone else, she looked like the perfect daughter-in-law. Attentive, kind, patient. But now I couldn't stop noticing the small things. The way she sometimes studied me when she thought I wasn't looking. The way she answered questions about me when other people were around. As if she knew my story better than I did. A few weeks later, the incidents became harder to ignore. One evening I went upstairs to get ready for bed, and discovered my bedroom dresser drawers were slightly open. Not wide, just enough to notice. I closed them and didn't think much of it until the next morning when Melissa came into the kitchen holding my old pearl necklace. "Linda," she said softly, "were you looking for this yesterday?" I blinked. "No, it was in the laundry room sink." "Dash the sink." She nodded slowly. Daniel glanced up from his cereal. "Mom, you really don't remember putting it there?" "Dash, I never touched it," I said. Melissa tilted her head with that same gentle concern. "Well, maybe you meant to put it somewhere else and forgot." Daniel sighed quietly. "Mom, this is exactly what we've been talking about." Something inside me tightened. "What do you mean?" He set his spoon down. "Melissa says you've been misplacing things a lot lately." I looked at her. She met my eyes with the same calm expression she always wore, like a nurse comforting a difficult patient. "I'm just worried about you," she said softly. "Worried?" The word sat heavily between us. Over the next month, more small incidents happened. My reading glasses disappeared and later turned up inside a kitchen cabinet. A bag of groceries I clearly remembered placing on the counter was found in the laundry room. Once, Melissa even claimed she found my wallet in the backyard flower bed. Every time something appeared in a strange place, she was the one who discovered it. Every time she spoke about it gently, kindly, and always in front of Daniel. At first, I tried to defend myself. I didn't do that. I would remember. That doesn't make sense. But the more I protested, the more worried Daniel looked. One evening he sat me down at the kitchen table. "Mom," he said carefully, "I think we should schedule another doctor's appointment." "I'm not sick." "It's not about being sick," he said. "Sometimes memory changes with age." "I'm 62, Daniel," I replied. "Not 90. Melissa stood quietly by the sink, drying dishes while we talked. "I just want everyone to feel safe," she said softly. Safe. As if I was somehow dangerous. That was when I started questioning myself. Late at night, lying awake in bed, I would replay the day in my mind. Did I move those things? Could I have forgotten? A terrible thought began creeping into my mind. What if Melissa was right? What if something really was wrong with me? But there were moments that didn't add up. Like the afternoon, I clearly remembered leaving my purse on the dining room chair before going upstairs to take a shower. When I came back down, it was gone. I searched the entire house before Melissa suddenly appeared from the hallway holding it. "Oh," she said with mild surprise. "It was in the basement." "The basement?" I asked. "Yes," she said. Daniel looked at me with quiet concern. And suddenly I felt something worse than anger. I felt doubt. Not in Melissa. In myself. Days later, I overheard something that changed everything. I was walking down the hallway when I heard Melissa's voice in the living room. She was on the phone. I stopped when I heard my name. "She's getting worse," Melissa said quietly. There was a pause while the other person spoke. "I know," she continued. "But Daniel doesn't want to believe it yet." Another pause. "I just don't think she can live alone much longer." My heart began to pound. Because I wasn't living alone. I was standing right there in the house she was talking about. And suddenly I understood something that made my blood run cold. Melissa wasn't just telling stories about my forgetfulness. She was building a case. Slowly. Carefully. Patiently. A story where I was losing control of my mind. And she was the responsible one trying to help. But if that story became believable enough, I had a terrible feeling about what might come next. And at the time, I had no idea how far Melissa was willing to go to make sure everyone believed her version of the truth. The night I overheard Melissa on the phone, I didn't confront her. Not immediately. Instead, I stood quietly in the hallway, my heart beating so loudly I was certain she would hear it through the wall. "She's getting worse," Melissa had said. Those words echoed in my mind long after the call ended. I slipped back to my bedroom without making a sound. The hallway floorboards creaked softly beneath my feet, a sound I had known for decades. Normally it was comforting, part of the house's familiar voice. But that night it felt like the house itself was warning me. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, staring at the framed photograph on my nightstand. It was one of my favorites. Daniel at 12 years old, standing in the backyard beside Robert while they built a crooked wooden birdhouse. Robert had always been patient with him. "Measure twice, cut once," he used to say. Back then, Daniel trusted my judgment the way children trust their parents without question. Now he looked at me like I might forget my own name. And Melissa had something to do with that. Still, I tried to be rational. Maybe she really believed I was struggling. Maybe the strange things happening around the house were coincidences. But deep down, a quiet voice inside me whispered something else. Coincidences didn't happen this often. The next morning, I paid closer attention. Melissa was making pancakes in the kitchen when I came downstairs. The sweet smell of syrup filled the air, mixing with the soft sizzling of butter in the pan. "Good morning," she said warmly. Her smile looked exactly the same as always. If she had been talking about me behind my back just hours earlier, she gave no sign of it. "Morning," I replied carefully. Daniel sat at the table scrolling through his phone. I poured myself coffee and took my usual seat across from him. Everything felt normal. Too normal. Melissa set a plate of pancakes in front of Daniel, and then one in front of me. Eat while they're hot, she said. I noticed something then. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the small shelf by the refrigerator, where we kept our keys and wallets. Just for a second. But it was enough. Because when I looked over there myself, my wallet wasn't there. I had placed it there the night before. I was sure of it. I stood up slowly and walked to the shelf. No wallet. Daniel looked up. Something wrong, Mom? My wallet isn't here. Melissa frowned sympathetically. Oh no, she said. Not again. Again. That word carried a quiet accusation. I left it right here. I insisted. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Mom. But Melissa stepped forward gently. Let's just look for it, she said in a soothing tone. For the next 10 minutes, we searched the kitchen and living room. Melissa checked the couch cushions. Daniel looked under the dining table. Finally, Melissa disappeared into the hallway. A moment later, she returned holding my wallet. It was in the linen closet, she said softly. The linen closet. My chest tightened. I didn't put it there. Daniel sighed. Mom, maybe you just forgot. I didn't forget. The words came out sharper than I intended. Melissa raised her hands calmly. It's okay, she said. Nobody's blaming you. But that was exactly what was happening. I could see it in Daniel's eyes. The quiet worry. The cautious patience people use when they think someone is fragile. And for the first time, I felt something stronger than confusion. I felt anger. Because I knew something they didn't. I knew my own mind. Later that afternoon, I went into the laundry room to fold some towels. The house was quiet. Daniel had gone to work, and Melissa was upstairs. As I reached for a towel, something caught my attention. The back door was slightly open. Just an inch. A thin line of sunlight cut across the tile floor. I frowned and walked over to close it. That's when I noticed the small wooden stool sitting beside the door. It wasn't usually there. Melissa had moved it closer to the wall. And suddenly, a memory flashed through my mind. A few days earlier, I had walked into the kitchen late at night and seen Melissa standing by the key shelf. She had jumped slightly when she noticed me. Oh, she had said quickly. I thought I heard something outside. At the time, I hadn't thought much about it. Now it felt different. Now it felt like a puzzle piece sliding slowly into place. What if the strange things around the house weren't accidents? What if someone was moving them? That thought stayed with me the rest of the evening. But proving it was another matter entirely. Because Melissa was careful. Very careful. She never accused me directly. She only suggested. She only worried. And she always made sure Daniel was there when the evidence appeared. By the end of the week, I noticed something else that chilled me. Daniel had started locking certain cabinets. One evening, I heard the quiet click of a new lock on the garage door. When I asked him about it, he avoided my eyes. It's just for safety, he said. Safety. The same word Melissa liked to use. That night, as I lay awake listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs, a terrible realization settled over me. Melissa wasn't just making Daniel doubt me. She was slowly changing the way the entire house worked. Locks. Conversations with relatives. Stories about misplaced things. It was all building towards something. Something that would make everyone believe I couldn't take care of myself anymore. And if that happened, this house, my house, would no longer be mine. But Melissa had made one small mistake. She assumed I was too confused to notice. Too forgetful to connect the pieces. She had no idea I was already beginning to understand what she was doing. And once that understanding settled into my bones, I started thinking about how I could prove it. The moment I truly began to suspect Melissa was deliberately setting the stage against me came on a quiet Thursday afternoon. It was raining lightly outside, the kind of steady drizzle that turns the sky pale gray and makes the whole house feel dimmer than usual. I had spent the morning reading in the living room, a blanket folded over my lap while the television murmured softly in the background. Melissa had gone out around noon. Or at least, that's what she said. I'm meeting a friend for lunch, she told me as she slipped on her coat. Daniel had already left for work. The moment the front door closed behind her, the house fell silent. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to relief. Because when Melissa wasn't there, strange things didn't happen. Nothing moved. Nothing vanished. Nothing reappeared in odd places. The house behaved like the house I had lived in for 27 years. Around 2 o'clock, I decided to bake banana bread. It was an old recipe Robert loved, and sometimes the familiar rhythm of measuring flour and stirring batter helped quiet the restless thoughts that had been circling my mind lately. The kitchen filled with the warm smell of cinnamon and sugar as the bread baked in the oven. For an hour, everything felt peaceful, normal. But when the timer chimed and I opened the oven door, something happened that made my stomach twist. My phone was gone. I had left it on the kitchen counter just minutes earlier. I looked around slowly. The counter was clear. I checked the table. Nothing. The chair beside the refrigerator. Still nothing. A familiar unease crept up my spine. Melissa wasn't supposed to be home. But someone had moved my phone. I walked quietly toward the hallway. The house was silent. Too silent. Then I heard something upstairs. A faint sound. Footsteps. My heart began to pound. Melissa. I called. No answer. I climbed the stairs slowly, gripping the railing as I went. The hallway at the top looked empty, but the door to Melissa and Daniel's bedroom was slightly open, and I was certain it had been closed earlier. I stepped closer. The carpet muffled my footsteps as I approached the doorway. Melissa. Still no reply. I pushed the door open gently. The room was empty, but something was wrong. The closet door was wide open, and sitting on the dresser was my phone. I stared at it for several seconds, my mind racing. I had not brought my phone upstairs. I was absolutely certain of that. Then I heard a sound behind me, a soft creak. I turned quickly. Melissa stood in the hallway. She looked startled to see me. "Oh," she said, placing a hand against her chest. "You scared me." My heart was still racing. "I thought you went out." "I forgot my wallet," she said casually. Her eyes moved past me into the bedroom. "Oh," she said, noticing the phone on the dresser. "You found it." "I didn't lose it." She gave a small, patient smile. "It was on the kitchen counter," she said. "I brought it up for you earlier." That's not true." Her expression softened in that familiar, almost pitying way. "Linda," she said gently, "you probably just forgot." Something inside me snapped then. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a thread finally breaking after being stretched too tight. "I did not forget," I said calmly. Melissa didn't argue. She simply nodded in that same understanding way that made my skin crawl. "Of course," she said. Then she picked up her purse from the bed and walked past me down the hallway. I stood there alone for a long moment. My phone sat on the dresser where she had placed it. Not where I had left it, where she had placed it. And suddenly I understood something very clearly. Melissa wasn't just moving things around the house. She was doing it when she knew I would notice. Then she was calmly telling everyone I had forgotten. It was deliberate, careful, almost rehearsed. By the time Daniel came home that evening, she had already told him the story. I knew because of the way he looked at me during dinner. Concerned, cautious, like he was trying to avoid upsetting me. "Mom," he said halfway through the meal, "Melissa told me you got confused about your phone today." I set my fork down. I wasn't confused. Melissa glanced at him sympathetically. "She just couldn't remember bringing it upstairs," she explained softly. Daniel sighed. "Mom, it's okay." The same words again. "It's okay." I looked at him across the table and felt a deep ache in my chest. Because he believed her. Not completely, but enough. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The rain had stopped, and the house was quiet except for the occasional creak of wood settling in the cool night air. Melissa's plan was working. Slowly, patiently. If things continued like this, Daniel, and eventually everyone else, would believe I couldn't take care of myself anymore. And once people believe that about you, they start making decisions on your behalf. Decisions about your home, your money, your independence. I couldn't let that happen. But arguing with Melissa clearly wasn't enough. She had already planted doubt in everyone's mind. I needed proof. Something that showed exactly what was happening inside this house when no one was watching. And as I lay there in the dark, listening to the quiet ticking of the hallway clock, an idea slowly began to take shape. A simple one, but powerful. Because if Melissa was moving things around the house to make me look unstable, then the best thing I could do was make sure someone else saw it happen. Someone who didn't rely on memory. Someone who didn't believe stories. Someone who simply recorded the truth. The next morning, I drove to the electronics store downtown. And before the week was over, I had installed security cameras throughout the house. Melissa had no idea they were there. But very soon, they would show me exactly what she had been doing all along. The cameras were smaller than I expected. That was the first thing I noticed when the young man at the electronics store opened the box and showed them to me. "They're motion activated," he explained, turning one in his hand so I could see the lens. "You can check everything from your phone." I nodded slowly. Perfect. He asked me if I wanted them installed professionally. I told him no. Not because I couldn't use the help, but because I didn't want anyone else asking questions about why a 62-year-old woman suddenly needed cameras inside her own home. So that afternoon, I brought the box home and waited. Melissa and Daniel wouldn't be back until after 6. That gave me almost 4 hours. Plenty of time. The house felt different that day. Quiet but tense somehow, like it was holding its breath. I opened the box at the kitchen table and carefully laid the cameras out in front of me. There were 4 of them in total, small black, no larger than the palm of my hand. Simple, unobtrusive. The instructions were surprisingly easy to follow. Within an hour, I had connected them to my phone and tested the live feed. My hands trembled slightly as I watched the small screens flicker to life. Camera 1, the kitchen. Camera 2, the living room. Camera 3, the hallway leading to the bedrooms. Camera 4, the small entryway near the back door. Every place where things had mysteriously appeared or disappeared. Once everything was set up, I hid them carefully. The kitchen camera sat behind a decorative ceramic jar near the microwave. The living room camera rested on the bookshelf between 2 old travel guides Robert and I had bought years ago. The hallway camera blended into the corner near the ceiling. And the final camera, near the back door, sat behind a small potted plant. When I finished, I stepped back and looked around the house. Nothing seemed different. That was exactly what I wanted. Melissa returned home around 5:30. I heard her car pull into the driveway while I was sitting in the living room pretending to read. The front door opened. "Linda," she called. "I'm in here." She stepped inside, carrying 2 grocery bags. "Picked up a few things for dinner," she said brightly. Her eyes moved around the room casually. Just a quick glance. But I watched carefully. She didn't notice anything unusual. Good. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I opened the camera app on my phone for the first time. 4 small video windows appeared on the screen. The kitchen was dark except for the soft glow of the refrigerator light. The living room looked peaceful, the couch empty. The hallway camera showed the closed bedroom doors. Everything looked ordinary. And for the next few days, nothing happened. No missing items. No extrañe discoveries. No gentle conversations about my forgetfulness. At first, I wondered if installing the cameras had somehow changed Melissa's behavior. But that didn't make sense. She didn't know they were there. Still, I kept checking the recordings every evening when I was alone in my room. Hour after hour of quiet footage. Sometimes Daniel walking through the kitchen. Sometimes Melissa making coffee. Nothing unusual. By the 5th day, I started to doubt myself again. Maybe I had imagined things. Maybe Melissa really believed I was forgetful. Maybe the strange incidents were just accidents. Then Saturday morning came. And everything changed. Daniel had gone to the hardware store. Melissa was in the kitchen making tea. I was sitting in the living room pretending to watch television. After a few minutes, she stepped into the hallway. I waited until I heard the bathroom door close. Then I quietly opened the camera app. The kitchen camera showed the empty room. The hallway camera showed Melissa entering the bathroom. The living room camera showed me. I switched to the recorded footage from earlier that morning. And that's when I saw it. Melissa, standing alone in the kitchen. The timestamp showed 7:42 a.m. She glanced toward the hallway, checking to make sure no one was there. Then she walked over to the key shelf. My heart began to pound, because I knew exactly what she was doing. She picked up my reading glasses, the ones I had left on the table during breakfast. She looked at them for a moment. Then she walked calmly across the kitchen, opened the pantry door, and placed them behind a box of cereal. My breath caught in my throat. She closed the pantry door and walked away like nothing had happened. I stared at the screen in disbelief. There it was, clear as daylight. Melissa had moved them, deliberately, carefully. Then, 30 minutes later on the recording, something even worse happened. Melissa opened the pantry again, pulled out the glasses, and walked into the living room, where Daniel was sitting. I couldn't hear the conversation clearly from the kitchen camera, but I could see the moment she handed him the glasses, and the way he looked toward me afterward, concerned, exactly like he had looked so many times before. My hands trembled as I replayed the clip. Once, twice, 3 times, each time confirming what I had feared. Melissa wasn't just suggesting I was forgetful. She was creating the evidence. And suddenly every strange moment over the past few months made sense. The keys, the wallet, the necklace, the purse, all of it. Carefully staged, carefully discovered, carefully explained. I sat there staring at the footage for a long time, because now I finally had proof. But proof alone wasn't enough. If I showed Daniel the video right away, Melissa would find a way to twist the story. She always did. No. If I wanted the truth to be undeniable, I needed to let her keep going. Let her think her plan was still working. And quietly gather everything the cameras captured. Because if Melissa believed she was fooling everyone, sooner or later, she would make a mistake big enough for the whole family to see. And when that moment came, the cameras would be watching. Once I saw the first video, everything inside me changed. Before that moment, part of me still wondered if I might somehow be mistaken. When people repeat the same doubts to you often enough, those doubts begin to seep into your own thinking. But the camera didn't doubt. The camera didn't forget. It simply showed the truth. And the truth was sitting right there on my phone screen. Melissa moving my glasses into the pantry and then finding them later. After watching that clip for the 4th time, I slowly set my phone down on the bedside table. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, from anger. But it was a quiet anger, the kind that settles deep inside your chest rather than exploding outward. Because now that I knew what she was doing, I understood something else. Melissa believed she had already won. She believed I was confused enough that I wouldn't question the strange things happening around the house. And more importantly, she believed Daniel trusted her more than he trusted me. That belief made her careless. Careless enough to keep doing exactly what she'd been doing for months. Which meant the cameras would keep recording. That evening, Melissa made her usual spaghetti dinner. The smell of tomato sauce and basil filled the kitchen as she stirred the pot, humming softly to herself. Daniel arrived home around 6:30. "Something smells good," he said, kissing her cheek as he walked in. I sat at the dining table with a book open in front of me, pretending to read. Melissa smiled brightly. "Just something simple tonight." They moved around the kitchen together with the easy rhythm of a married couple. Watching them, it would have been impossible to guess that anything was wrong. But I knew better now. During dinner, Melissa suddenly looked at me with that same gentle concern she'd been perfecting for months. "Linda," she said softly, "did you find your glasses today?" My fork paused halfway to my mouth. I forced myself to look puzzled. "My glasses?" "Yes," she said kindly. "You were looking for them this morning." Daniel glanced at me. "Oh right," he said. "Melissa found them in the pantry." I nodded slowly, as if the memory was vague. "Oh, that's right." Melissa's eyes flickered briefly with satisfaction. Just for a second. But I saw it. She believed the story had worked again. Later that night, I watched the footage from the cameras. Sure enough, Melissa had moved something else. This time it was my house keys. At 2:17 p.m., while Daniel was at work and I had stepped outside to water the garden. She quietly removed the keys from the shelf and slipped them into the laundry basket. Then she waited. At 3:02 p.m., she found them. The pattern was unmistakable. She created the problem. Then she solved it. Always gently. Always patiently. Always in front of Daniel. Over the next 2 weeks, the cameras recorded several more incidents. Melissa moving my reading book from the coffee table into the garage. Melissa placing my purse behind the couch cushions. Melissa taking a small envelope of mail from the kitchen counter and hiding it in the basement. Each time, she later discovered the item and explained to Daniel how concerned she was about my memory. Each time I played along. Sometimes I acted confused. Sometimes I shrugged and said maybe I had forgotten. Every time I did, Melissa's confidence seemed to grow. But something else was happening too. Something Melissa didn't realize. The cameras weren't just recording the staged moments. They were also recording the conversations. Not perfectly. Some of them were too far from the microphones, but enough to catch important pieces. One evening, I was reviewing the footage when I heard something that made my stomach tighten. It was late afternoon. Melissa was in the kitchen on the phone. Her voice sounded quieter than usual. "I know," she said. A pause. "I'm trying." Another pause. Daniel's starting to see it. He just needs more time. My heart began to beat faster. More time for what? The person on the other end said something I couldn't hear. Melissa sighed. "No, the doctor hasn't said anything official yet." "Doctor?" I leaned closer to the phone screen. "But once we get a proper evaluation," Melissa continued, "it'll be easier." Easier. The word echoed in my head. Another pause. "Yes," she said finally. "If she's declared mentally unfit, Daniel can take control of the house." My breath caught. Take control of the house. Everything suddenly made sense. The strange incidents. The careful conversations. The way Melissa always framed things as concern rather than accusation. She wasn't just trying to embarrass me. She was building evidence. Evidence that I couldn't manage my own life anymore. And if a doctor eventually believed that story, Daniel could legally take control of my finances, my property, my home, which meant Melissa would have exactly what she wanted. I sat there in silence after the recording ended. My hands felt cold, but my mind felt sharper than it had in weeks. Because now I understood the full plan. Melissa wasn't just gaslighting me. She was trying to erase me. Slowly, carefully, legally. And the worst part? Daniel had no idea. He thought he was protecting me. But in reality, he was being guided toward a decision that would take everything I had left. I looked down at my phone again. Hours and hours of footage sat quietly inside that camera system. Proof. Not just of the little tricks Melissa had been playing, but of the real reason behind them. And suddenly I realized something important. If Melissa believed Daniel needed more time to see what she wanted him to see, then I needed to make sure he saw something else first. Something she could never explain away. Something that would force the truth out into the open. And I already had an idea how to do it. For the first time in months, I slept well that night. Not because the situation had improved, but because I finally understood it. There is a strange kind of peace that comes when confusion disappears. Even if the truth you uncover is ugly. Melissa wasn't worried about me. She wasn't trying to help me. She was preparing to take my life apart piece by piece and hand the remains to Daniel wrapped neatly in the excuse of concern. And the most painful part was knowing my son had no idea. He trusted her. That trust had become the foundation of her entire plan. But trust, like anything else, can crack when the right pressure is applied. And I intended to apply that pressure carefully. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The house was still dark when I stepped into the kitchen. The clock on the stove read 5:48 a.m. I brewed coffee and sat quietly at the table. The same place Robert and I had shared thousands of morning conversations over the years. Steam rose slowly from the mug in front of me. My phone sat beside it. On the screen were the camera recordings. Hours of them. Melissa hiding objects. Melissa staging discoveries. Melissa speaking on the phone about doctors and evaluations. Enough evidence to destroy her story completely. But I didn't want to rush. If I showed Daniel one small clip, Melissa would explain it away. She must have misunderstood. Dash, I was moving things to keep them safe. Dash, I didn't want to upset her. She would twist the moment into something harmless. No, I needed something bigger. Something undeniable. Something that showed exactly what she was doing in real time. Around 7 o'clock, Melissa came downstairs. She looked slightly surprised to see me already sitting at the table. "Good morning," she said. "Morning." She poured herself tea and sat across from me. For a moment, we simply listened to the quiet house waking up, the refrigerator humming, a car passing outside. Then she smiled gently. "How are you feeling today?" The question sounded innocent, but now I knew the weight behind it. "Fine," I said. "I'm glad to hear that," she replied. Her tone had that same careful warmth she always used when Daniel was around. But Daniel wasn't home yet, which meant this conversation wasn't for him. It was for her. She was checking, measuring, trying to see if I would behave the way she expected, and I decided to give her exactly what she wanted. Later that morning, while Daniel was getting ready for work, I stepped into the living room and pretended to search for something. "Did either of you see my wallet?" I asked. Melissa glanced up from the couch. "Oh dear," she said softly. Daniel looked concerned immediately. "Where did you last have it, Mom?" Dash, I'm not sure. Melissa stood and walked into the kitchen. Within 30 seconds, she returned holding the wallet. "It was in the refrigerator," she said gently. Daniel frowned. "Mom." I widened my eyes slightly. "In the refrigerator?" Melissa nodded slowly. "Don't worry," she said, placing a hand on Daniel's arm. "These things happen." Inside, I felt a cold satisfaction, because I already knew exactly when she had moved it. The camera had captured the entire thing at 6:32 that morning. She had slipped it onto the fridge shelf while I was upstairs brushing my hair. Now she believed the moment had played out perfectly. But something unexpected happened that afternoon. Something Melissa hadn't planned. Daniel came home early. It was just after 3 when the front door opened. Melissa looked up from the kitchen. "You're home early." "Dash meeting got canceled," he said. He dropped his keys on the table and loosened his tie. "I'm going to grab a quick shower." Melissa nodded. "Dinner will be ready soon." Daniel headed upstairs. A few minutes later, I saw Melissa glance toward the hallway. Then she moved. Quickly. She walked to the coffee table in the living room where I had left my reading glasses. She picked them up. Then she slipped them into the drawer of the TV cabinet. My heart began to pound, because Daniel was still upstairs. He would come down soon. And Melissa was setting up another one of her discoveries. Only this time, he had come home earlier than expected, which meant the timing might not work the way she planned. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Melissa walked back into the living room and looked around casually. Then she called toward the hallway. "Linda." "Yes. Have you seen your glasses today?" I looked up slowly. "No," she frowned sympathetically. "Oh dear. I hope they turn up." Just then Daniel came downstairs. Melissa turned to him. "Daniel, your mom can't find her glasses again." He sighed quietly. "Mom." But before Melissa could continue, Daniel walked directly to the coffee table. "They were here this morning," he said. He looked around the room. Then he opened the TV cabinet drawer. And there they were. Daniel picked them up slowly. Melissa blinked. "Oh," she said quickly. "That's strange." Daniel looked confused. "How would they end up in there?" Melissa hesitated. I don't know." For the first time in months, I saw uncertainty cross her face. Just a flicker. But it was there. Daniel handed the glasses to me. "Try to be more careful, Mom." "Dash, I will," I said quietly. But inside something had shifted. Daniel hadn't noticed the truth yet. But he had noticed something odd. And that small crack in Melissa's story was exactly what I needed. Because once doubt enters someone's mind, it tends to grow. Especially when the truth is waiting patiently in the shadows. And Melissa had no idea that the next few days were about to expose everything she had been doing. After the glasses incident, the air in the house felt different. It was subtle at first. Nothing dramatic. But something had shifted. Daniel didn't say anything openly, and Melissa continued behaving exactly as she always had, gentle, patient, attentive. If anything, she seemed even more careful about how she spoke to me in front of him. But I noticed the small things. Daniel paused longer before believing the stories. Sometimes he looked around the room before accepting where Melissa found something. Once or twice, he even asked a quiet question. How did that get there? Melissa always had an answer. She always did. But the answers came a little slower now. And that tiny hesitation was the beginning of everything unraveling. Meanwhile, the cameras kept recording. By that point, I had collected nearly 3 weeks of footage. Each evening after dinner, when Daniel and Melissa went upstairs, I sat in my bedroom and reviewed the clips. The pattern was unmistakable. Melissa moved things when no one was looking. Then she discovered them later with Daniel present. Sometimes hours later. Sometimes the next day. It was meticulous. Calculated. But like most careful plans, it had one weakness. The person carrying it out eventually becomes comfortable. And comfort leads to mistakes. The mistake happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Daniel had gone to work. I was sitting in the backyard reading when Melissa stepped outside with her phone pressed to her ear. She didn't see me at first. I was sitting behind the large maple tree Robert had planted decades ago, partially hidden by the low branches. Her voice sounded tense. "No," she said into the phone. "Not yet." She paced slowly across the patio. "I told you it takes time." I remained perfectly still. "I know what the lawyer said," she continued. "But Daniel still feels guilty." A pause. Then she lowered her voice slightly. "The doctor appointment is next week. If the evaluation goes the way we expect, it'll make everything easier." My chest tightened. So it was already arranged. Melissa sighed again. "Yes, once Daniel has legal authority, we can sell the house." Sell the house. The words landed like a stone in my stomach. "That's the plan," she said quietly. Another pause. "I just need to push things a little further." I heard footsteps behind me then. Melissa turned slightly and finally saw me sitting there. Her expression froze. For a split second, the carefully crafted mask slipped. "What are you doing out here?" she asked. "Reading," I said calmly. Her eyes searched my face. "How long have you been sitting there?" "Not long." She studied me for a moment. Then she forced a smile. "Nice weather today." "Yes," I replied. She ended the call and went back inside. But I noticed something important in that brief exchange. Melissa wasn't just surprised to see me. She was worried. Worried that I might have heard something. And when someone like Melissa starts to worry, they begin to rush. That evening, something happened that confirmed it. Daniel was watching television when Melissa suddenly walked into the living room holding my purse. "Linda," she said gently, "you left this in the garage again." Daniel frowned. "Mom, that's the 3rd time this week." But this time, something unexpected happened. Daniel walked toward the garage himself. "I'll check something," he said. Melissa stiffened slightly. "Check what?" But Daniel had already opened the door and stepped inside. For nearly a minute, the house was silent. Then he returned. "Mom," he said slowly, "the garage door was closed." "That's so." "So how would you forget your purse in there if you didn't open the door?" Melissa spoke quickly. "Maybe she opened it earlier and forgot." Daniel looked uncertain. "Maybe." But I could see the doubt growing. Later that night, I watched the camera footage again. And what I saw made my heart race. Because earlier that afternoon, while I was outside, Melissa had taken my purse and placed it inside the garage cabinet. She hadn't realized Daniel would check. She hadn't realized he might notice the door had never been opened. It was a small mistake. But it was the first time her story didn't line up perfectly with reality. And once someone notices one inconsistency, they start noticing others. 3 days later, another crack appeared. Daniel walked into the kitchen one evening just as Melissa was pulling my house keys out of a cabinet. For a brief moment, she looked startled. "I was just checking if they were here," she said quickly. Daniel stared at her. "Why would they be in there?" Melissa laughed nervously. "I don't know. Your mom sometimes puts things in strange places." Daniel nodded slowly. But something about the moment stayed with him. I could see it in his expression. That night, I reviewed the footage again. Every clip. Every staged moment. Every conversation. Then I organized them carefully. One folder for each incident. Dates. Times. Clear labels. By the time I finished, I had nearly an hour of undeniable proof. Not just of Melissa moving things, but of her discussing the plan. The doctor's evaluation. The house. Everything. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. The truth was finally complete. Now it was simply a matter of choosing the right moment. Because timing matters when you reveal something like this. Too early and people make excuses. Too late, and the damage is already done. But the perfect moment. That's when the truth lands exactly where it needs to. And as it turned out, that moment was coming sooner than Melissa expected. Because the doctor's appointment she had arranged for me was only 4 days away. The days leading up to the doctor's appointment were the longest of my life. I woke each morning with a quiet determination, knowing that the evidence on my phone was my lifeline. Every moment Melissa tried to stage something, I watched it unfold through the camera feeds, mentally noting each detail, each word, each carefully orchestrated gesture. Melissa had become more cautious in my presence, but she wasn't careful enough. She had underestimated how much I had learned. And more importantly, she had underestimated how determined I had become. That Thursday morning, Daniel left for work earlier than usual. Melissa was bustling around the kitchen, humming softly, preparing her version of a perfect day for me. I sipped my coffee calmly, the steam warming my fingers. I didn't rush. I didn't give any indication that I knew exactly what she had been doing for months. She walked past me several times, her steps light, precise. I could see the slight tension in her shoulders. She had caught glimpses of my focused attention on her movements, even if she didn't realize it. Then it happened. Melissa moved one of my reading glasses again. She didn't notice I had already set up the camera in the living room with a direct view of the table. This time, I didn't just watch the feed. I recorded it to a separate memory card, creating a separate, unalterable file that could never be disputed. She placed the glasses in the corner behind the couch. Then a minute later, she called out my name. "Linda, have you seen your glasses?" I looked up slowly as if unsure. "No, I don't see them anywhere," I said. Melissa smiled sympathetically. "Don't worry, they'll turn up. You've just been busy this week." Her tone, that practiced blend of concern and superiority, would have fooled anyone who wasn't watching the footage. And then the magic of timing unfolded. Daniel walked in the front door, returning from an unscheduled errand. He glanced toward the living room and saw Melissa holding the glasses, speaking in that soft, soothing voice. I could almost see the gears turning in his head. His brow furrowed. Something wasn't adding up. I waited, perfectly still, letting the tension build. Melissa, sensing his presence, froze for a split second. It was the smallest slip, but to anyone paying attention, it was huge. Daniel walked over and asked quietly, "Melissa, what are you doing?" Melissa's practiced smile faltered. "Oh, I was just checking the glasses. Linda misplaced them again." Daniel turned his gaze toward me, confusion and suspicion flashing in his eyes. "They were right here," I said softly, pointing toward the corner where the glasses had been moments earlier. Melissa hesitated. For the first time in months, she didn't have an immediate answer. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "So you moved them here?" Melissa laughed nervously. I was just trying to help." Daniel glanced at me. And that look, that slow dawning realization, it was exactly what I had been waiting for. I didn't say anything else. I simply let the footage do the talking. Later that evening, I calmly sat Daniel down in the living room and handed him my phone. "All of it," I said simply. "Everything you need to see." He looked at me, confused. "What is this?" "The cameras," I said. "They've been recording everything that's been happening in this house when you weren't around." He hesitated, then began to scroll through the clips. And with every minute of footage he watched, the doubt in his expression deepened. By the time he finished, the living room was silent. Melissa stood nearby, her face pale, her usual confidence gone. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Daniel turned toward her, his voice low and steady. "All this time, you've been manipulating me and my mother." Melissa's hands trembled. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Finally, the truth was out. The next morning, Daniel called the family together. I stayed quiet as he explained everything. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He simply presented the evidence. Melissa tried to defend herself, tried to say it was all misunderstanding, but the recordings were undeniable. Every staged discovery, every whispered phone conversation, every misplaced item, it was all captured. By the end of the day, she had no choice but to admit the truth. And with her admission, the tension that had built in our household for months began to dissolve. Daniel hugged me tightly, apologizing for not seeing it sooner. "I should have believed you," he said softly. "I'm just glad it's over," I said, feeling a heaviness lift from my chest. Melissa's betrayal had been exposed, but the family's bond had survived. The cameras had done more than capture evidence. They had restored trust. And as I sat in the living room that night, looking at the empty chairs and quiet house, I realized something important. Sometimes, patience and careful observation are the most powerful forms of justice. The days after the confrontation felt surreal. Melissa was gone from the house for most of the mornings, claiming she had family matters to attend to. Daniel stayed close to me, almost like he was trying to make up for all the times he had doubted me. The house, which had felt tense and suffocating for months, slowly began to feel like home again. I spent hours going through the camera footage one last time. Each clip reminded me of how carefully Melissa had plotted every little incident, but also how careful I had been in observing and recording. It wasn't revenge. It was self-preservation. And in the end, it had worked. I started to clean out the areas Melissa had manipulated the most: the pantry, the garage, the drawers. Every corner where she had tried to convince me I was losing my mind became a reminder of her deception. But rather than anger, I felt calm. The house was mine again, and I could breathe. Daniel and I talked late into the evening. He apologized over and over, though I told him it wasn't necessary. He needed to understand, he said, how close we had come to losing not just my peace of mind, but the trust between us. I nodded quietly. I didn't need long speeches or dramatic gestures. Seeing him recognize the truth was enough. Melissa eventually returned to collect her belongings. She didn't argue or plead. There was no dramatic confrontation, just quiet acknowledgement of what had happened. She avoided looking directly at me, and I returned the same level of calm neutrality. The cameras had already captured everything, and there was no longer any need for proof in anyone's mind. In the weeks that followed, life gradually returned to its rhythm. Daniel and I cooked together, walked in the garden, and shared quiet moments of reflection. I even laughed more freely, without fear that someone was watching or plotting behind my back. One evening, as I sat sipping tea in the kitchen, Daniel joined me. "You know," he said slowly, "I think I finally understand what you've been going through." I nodded. "It wasn't easy, but it's over now." He smiled a little sheepishly. "You were right all along. I didn't see it." I know," I said softly. "Sometimes it takes time for people to see the truth, even the people who love you the most." He reached out and took my hand. "I'll never doubt you like that again." And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. A sense of quiet victory. Not over Melissa, not even over the situation itself, but over fear, uncertainty, and betrayal. The cameras remained in the house for a while longer, a small safety net that reminded me how fragile trust can be, and how vital it is to protect it. But eventually, I took them down. I didn't need them anymore. The lessons had been learned. The truth had been restored. I also learned another thing. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes strength is quiet, patient, and deliberate. Sometimes it's simply watching and waiting, keeping your mind clear, and letting the truth speak for itself when the time is right. Daniel and I grew closer after everything. Our bond, tested and strained, became stronger. And even though the memory of Melissa's betrayal would always remain, it no longer had the power to make me doubt myself. I started keeping a small journal again, writing down thoughts, memories, and reflections. One evening, I penned something that I wanted to remember forever. Truth is patient. Lies are loud, but they eventually trip over themselves. And when they do, it's not about revenge. It's about reclaiming your peace. The house felt warm and welcoming again. The smell of fresh bread in the oven, the sunlight pouring through the windows, Daniel's quiet humming as he washed the dishes. It all felt real, alive, safe. I knew that life could throw challenges at us, sometimes from the people we trust most. But I also knew this: with patience, observation, and the courage to stand firm in what we know is right, we can overcome even the most calculated deception. Melissa's betrayal was painful, but it also taught me something invaluable: that I was stronger than I had ever imagined. And that truth, when captured and witnessed, has a way of restoring balance, if only we have the courage to wait for it. That night, I sat in the living room, sipping tea and reflecting. I thought about everyone watching this story, people who might have been doubted, gaslit, or betrayed themselves. I wanted them to know something important. You are not alone. And the truth, no matter how hidden, will eventually find its way into the light. Would you have had the patience to watch, wait, and gather proof like I did? Or would you have confronted it head-on? The cameras may have captured the evidence, but the real victory came from knowing I had held onto my dignity and my mind the entire time. And that, more than anything, was worth everything. As I sit here tonight, the house quiet and still, I can't help but think about all the small, silent battles that happen behind closed doors. Most people don't see them. Most people don't hear the whispered lies, the careful manipulations, the subtle moments meant to make someone doubt themselves. I lived that. I felt it. I questioned my own mind for months, wondering if I had imagined things, if maybe I was too sensitive, too forgetful, too something. And yet the truth was always there. Quiet, patient, waiting to be noticed. And when it finally revealed itself, it wasn't loud or explosive. It was undeniable, and it restored not only the facts, but my own confidence in who I am. Life teaches us in strange ways. Sometimes the lessons are harsh, painful, even humiliating. But they also show us strength we didn't know we had. They show us resilience. They show us the value of trusting our instincts, observing carefully, and when the time is right, allowing the truth to speak for itself. So tonight, I leave you with this. If you've ever felt gaslit, doubted, or betrayed by someone close to you, know that you are not alone. Your reality is valid. Your instincts are valuable. And sometimes, just sometimes, patience and clarity can be more powerful than anger or confrontation. Would you have had the patience to watch, wait, and gather proof like I did? Or would you have confronted it without knowing the full truth? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if my story has touched you, helped you, or reminded you of your own strength, please subscribe and support this channel for more stories that shine a light on the truth, resilience, and the quiet power we all carry inside us. Because in the end, it's not about revenge. It's about finding your peace, reclaiming your life, and letting the truth guide you home.